Hi, my name is Sierra Austin, and I'm going to be giving my speech on the U.S. military and budget cuts. Close your eyes and visualize where you were and how you felt on September 11th. Did you feel fear, anger, or remorse? Or maybe you're so stunned that you don't know what you felt. Think of all of the families and the lives that have been lost in efforts to end the war on terror. Do you know any service members personally or through acquaintances that have deployed in support of one of these operations, or in response to the numerous humanitarian efforts caused by natural disasters across the world, such as Hurricane Katrina or the typhoons that struck the Pacific Islands? Now imagine that we no longer had the money or the manpower to respond to those in such stricken climes, and we couldn't defend ourselves from devastating blows like 9/11. Ladies and gentlemen, if there is not an adjustment in the way our military is funded, we may not have to imagine what being unable to respond would feel like. The biggest issue facing the United States military today is the cuts in manpower, training, and morale that overall greatly restrict the readiness of our forces. Funding is the number one factor that dictates the size and strength of our forces. Without adequate funding, operations are drastically limited to what can be accomplished. The Department of Defense request for the 2015 fiscal year budget is $496 billion, which is down from fiscal year 2014's budget of $553 billion, according to an article in the Military Times. What does this mean? This means that new gear, training, personnel costs, health care, food, housing allowance, all these areas are drastically limited. Troops. Troops are the most important part of the readiness factor. The DoD can go out and spend all of the money they want to on the latest tech gadgets, the greatest gear, all that fun stuff. But without a strong, well-trained fighting force to man those systems and use that gear to the highest potential, the U.S. military would get nothing accomplished. The issues we're facing with the lack of funding, however, is translating into a progressive and detrimental loss in troops. The Military Times reports manpower in 2015 is set to be reduced an additional 36,700 troops, which brings the total active duty component to 1.31 million troops, and 5,000 of those troops will come from the U.S. Marine Corps, the smallest branch of the U.S. Armed Services. The loss of money for training and troops is translating into a seriously hindered military force. This issue facing our field today is the most important because the U.S. military cannot appropriately respond to domestic or foreign crises that we actually face today without the appropriate resources. According to an independent panel appointed by the Pentagon and Congress to assess the functionality of the size of today's military, it was deemed to be too small to handle the global threats that we are currently facing. This statement means exactly what it says. The Marine Corps has scaled back, or the military, has scaled back so far that it put us as a nation and all of our allies at risk. I think the biggest thing to understand as Americans is that we are not responsible for what happens just here in America. We are the sounding board and the big brother and big sister for the global environment. They look to us for advice and support, and when we make changes as drastic as the changes we are making in scaling back our military, other countries are affected by that. We could see this in many instances across the world, such as the crisis in Ukraine, territory, vast amounts of territory in Iraq that was once under Allied control being reclaimed by the terrorists, and the use of chemical weapons in Syria. I mean, our presence and actions do not only affect the status of the U.S., but those countries around the nation that depend on our aid and support. In order to efficiently, in order to put things back in order, I should say, we must regain the force of our perceived strength and our military strength in order to adequately enforce the rules and regulations that have governed the global scene since the end of World War II. Now, if you would, think back to the introduction of my presentation and recall that feeling that you felt when you realized that the U.S. might not always be able to protect and aid its citizens. And I want you to think to yourself, is that really a world you want to live in? Is that something you want your children to experience, or your grandchildren, or your great-grandchildren? I know for a fact that as long as our country is intact, I don't want anyone to feel that way and be an American citizen. In order to prevent that from happening, we need to end budget cuts and restore the ranks of the U.S. military. Money for personnel, training, and quality equipment has to be regenerated to ensure we can continue to defend our citizens, the country, and our allies around the world, as we've always done against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Thank you.